Hey, welcome to today's podcast. We got my buddy on today, Pastor Adam. We have a great conversation on how to set up your church to financially win. The bottom line is we need resources. So how do we set up our church to win financially? We're getting into some specific topics about budget and how to look at budget and how to prioritize things. So I know you're going to enjoy the conversation. Before we jump into it, I want to remind you to check out churchboom.org. And I want to remind you of our coaching certification program. If you have ever thought about being a coach, we've got a program for you that you can sign up, be a part of it. We help you from A to Z on how to become a coach, how to run your own coaching ministry, how to create a second income or even a second chapter for your life. So go to churchboom.org and check out our coaching certification program. But let's jump into our conversation now with my buddy Adam. Well, let's jump into it, man. How can I serve you today? What's on your mind?
Hey, Chris, man, thank you, first of all, for taking my call and my questions, really. So we're struggling a little bit. As you know, we went from one campus to two campuses, and we added quite a bit of staff. And my question is, what do you do when you have, and how do you address it when you have staff that have the heart of the house, but don't necessarily have the capacity? I know you talk about the 3 C's in leadership and that kind of thing, but how do you address that without wounding folks that you really want to empower?
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you right, Adam, what you're saying is they got the heart, they got the spirit of the house, they got the heart, they got all that, but their capacity isn't there.
Yes, sir.
And that is a really tough spot because the temptation, Adam, is to choose friendship over leadership.
That's good. And
we end up choosing, which sounds so anti who we are as Christians, but we end up choosing the friendship, choosing that you're our friend, you're our buddy, we've known each other forever, and we kind of excuse their lack of leadership, and that's a major mistake. We have to know whether or not their capacity isn't there, or we haven't led them there.
That's good.
And that could be another thing as well. And I think you have to be aware of those things as well. I think the goal always isn't just, hey, get off the bus. The goal is to find another seat on the bus.
Yeah.
But what you don't want is you don't want the entire organization suffering because of an inability to deal with a situation.
That's good.
And another thing that's really important is one of the worst things you can do for your strong leaders is to tolerate a weak one. And I say weak if they start getting toxic, or they're not picking up their weight, they're not moving at the same speed, they're not, and people are starting to notice it. They're not questioning the person, they're questioning you.
Yeah.
Why aren't you dealing with it? And it's not a matter of, oh, you're out of here, you're not good. It's a matter of, man, we need to find a different place for you on the bus. As you grow as a leader, and as the church grows, and you more multi-site and whatever it is that God has for you, as you grow as a leader, this idea of putting the right leaders in the right place, finding the right leaders, not bringing people on too soon as leaders, becomes a crucial situation. Go ahead.
So practically, and honestly, Chris, we made some of those mistakes. Because we adopted a church and whatever, we made some decisions. But the question is, so what is on a practical side, what for you does that lead in conversation to, hey, we're just going to move your seat? Because these folks are very talented. They're just not talented where they're sitting.
Yep.
So practically, what does that sound like?
Yeah. I don't know the entire situation, but if I was doing it, I think that you have to, obviously you want to encourage and inspire to the best that you can. But Adam, hey, well, first of all, let me back up. We have to know that we've given them every chance. We've given them the best chance we can. When we finally get to that point, assuming you're at that point, it's Adam, hey, I think it's best to be straightforward. I don't think it's good when we patronize people. There's but Adam, I'm going to be, we've talked about the situation of you heading up the guest services, And man, we've talked about it over and over and over. And I don't want us to have to come back to this. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking your position and I'm going to move you over to something else because I feel like you'd be more successful over there. And then I'm going to move someone else into that position. It is pretty straightforward. I think early on I would sort of fumble through it and take 20 minutes to talk about it. It's like, well, because how God is and God sometimes and all this stuff. I've already had 2 or 3 conversations. This ain't a shock to the person.
Right.
And so I just plainly just say, hey, we've talked about it. I don't think this is the best spot for you. I'd like to move you over here. So I'm going to be doing that, and I'm going to move someone else in. You have to know in your conversations whether this is a discussion or a decision. You're coming into the conversation, discussion or decision. The first time you talk to someone, it's discussion. The second time you talk to someone, it's discussion with a little bit more strength to it. But there's a point where you walk in with decision. But you have to mentally know coming in, every meeting you have, is this discussion or is this decision?
Oh, that's so good.
And you have to know that. Otherwise, you kind of waffle and you patronize, and you don't want to do that. If it's decision, you come in and you tell them the decision. Politely, kindly, nicely, all that. But you tell them, hey, look, we've talked about it a few times. It doesn't seem to be working out. I want to move you into a different position. I'm going to do that. We're talking about it. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to move someone else in. I want to get you the training you need. I want to get you the help you need, but we're going to be moving that, and that's going to be effective at the end of the month, that kind of a thing. Just because you've already made the decision.
Yeah.
So you have to know in every conversation, Adam, any confrontational conversation dealing with a leader, is this discussion or decision? Always know that in your head when you're walking into the meeting.
Yeah, that's good. So I guess this is somewhat of a connected question with that, is how do you create sustainable, and I think that's kind of my strong word in that statement, but kind of sustainable systems and rhythms for your church, especially in those like staff and key leader positions. We feel like I know your book mentions missional drift. I feel like we keep coming in, and I feel like we've sold it and taught it and coached it well, and we seem to have this wane off.
When you say wane off, is that like the leader, just so I understand, is that leaders kind of drifting from the mission? Is that leaders drifting from the culture? How would you describe that?
I feel like we have embraced our culture very well. I feel like from the mission, we kind of start creating new systems that take us out of the system that we've created from the church. So we create this system, and then we kind of come in and create this micro system inside of it.
Well, here's a micro system. Here's a couple thoughts for you. It's interesting, I think, as leaders, that we fight for simplicity, but we drift to complexity. We don't mean to, we do. And sort of like in the book A Simple Church, came out years ago. It was like, okay, these are the 3 things we're going to do. These are the 5 things we're going to do. And then all of a sudden it's like these, as you call it, microsystems come in, and this system comes in, and that system comes in. And next thing you know, we started off with simplicity. We fight for simplicity, but then we drift towards complexity. And we have a way of doing that in as leaders. I think it's our job as the leader to make sure that we are constantly making sure that our mission is clear. Language shapes behavior, and behavior shapes culture, but that language is the important part of like, look, this is who we are, that clear language of who you are. This is who we are. This is what we do. And we don't just create all these systems and all these ideas and all these strategies that take us away from the clarity and the simplicity of who we are. You have to fight for it. You're gonna naturally be drifting. I always say vision leaks and people drift. So you're always drifting. You're always drifting. You're always drifting. You got to pull it back. And you might get real practical. Hey, if we launch a system, we run it through this team. If we launch a strategy, we run it through this team. We don't launch anything until we run it through this team. And we filter it through a few questions. I love this, by the way. I call it traffic lights. Everybody's got their own way. Traffic lights could work in this. It's a whole different thing. But traffic lights could be simple as when you're thinking about we're adding a program, we're going to add a program, going to add a system, going to add a whatever, an event, going to add something. We're going to ask ourselves 4 or 5 questions, and they're the same questions every time. And you got to make up those questions like, does this fall in line with who we are? Will this take away from what we're doing? Will this cause us to drift from our mission? Do we have the right leaders in place? Do we have the right volunteers in place? And if you look at your team and just say, hey, before we start a program, before we start anything, we're going to ask these top 5 questions. And I call it traffic lights because these 5 questions have to have green lights. If they have red lights, we don't go.
That's good.
And it just does this every time. And so you got to think about what those questions would be. They could prefer or refer to like money, volunteers, leadership, mission, culture. Does it cause us to drift? Are we ready for it? Is it going to take us away from who we are? Do we have the finances for it? Do we have the leadership for it? What will we have to give up to gain this? Or are we okay with that? Like, there's, you look at it and I say, hey, if you come up with 6, 7 traffic lights and 6 are green and 1's yellow, that's okay. But if you got 2 red or anything like that, it's like, no, don't move forward. That forces it. Like, hey, staff, we're not going to do anything until we look at these questions.
That's
and
so
it's very simple questions. You just pull out, everybody's got it on their laptop. You pull it out and go, all right, great idea. Let's run it through the questions. It's no big deal. It's done in 5 minutes.
That is
Keeps everybody in line.
Yes, sir. That is so good. And last question, what is your process for budgeting to add new staff?
I think there's a few parts of, I got a lot of thoughts on budgeting, but when it comes to staff, first, I think you need to know, are you budgeting for where you are or are you budgeting for where you're going? So sometimes if you're sitting on $500,000 in cash reserves and you're like, oh man, okay, I want to bring someone in June of this year or whatever, okay, and it's going to cost X amount of dollars. Okay, now I don't know board, I don't know however you run it, I don't know team if we're going to be ready for that financially. I think we'll be close, but we might not be ready. So then you move into when you're staffing for the future, you're taking a calculated risk. So again, let's go back to a church, whatever. Church has $500,000 in their cash reserves, and the church says, hey man, starting in June, we're going to hire this person. I'm going to pay him full time and give him benefits and everything, but probably going to put us in the hole about $40,000. I think we can come up with some of it, but not all of it. It's going to put us in the hole $40,000. I'm just using whatever number. It doesn't matter.
Sure.
Okay, but I believe that this staff addition is going to cause us to grow, and in about 6 to 9 months or a year, we should be able to take care of that. So here's what I always call 2 things I always talk about: calculated risk and acceptable loss. What is an acceptable loss? Okay, we're going to lose $40,000. Okay, that's acceptable loss. Now, when we hit 50, it's like, wait a minute, this ain't working the way we thought. Now, what are we going to do? Now it's a difficult situation because you got the person there. Yeah. But and then you got to figure out like, how are we going to do this? What are we going to adjust? And you kind of have to know that in advance that, okay, we have to stop that program. Like if worse comes to worse, I want to keep this person here, but this is what we'll have to do to fix the budget. But there is a calculated risk and an acceptable loss. Now, if you have the money, you work it into your budget. That's a pretty simple thing. But if you don't have the money, or if you think you have some of the money, or you think that the person will help grow the church and help grow the finances, then again, you look and go, okay, over the next 9 months, we're going to lose $40,000. Is that an acceptable loss? Yeah. And as long as everybody's acceptable about it, and the reason you tell your team that, elders that, and all that is because when they're freaking out and you're like, yeah, we're 23,000 in the hole, but we said an acceptable loss was 40. We're okay with that. We're not bringing this up again So no one's worried about it. You don't get all wound up at every meeting. It's like, no, we said we would be in the hole, but we said an acceptable loss would be 40,000. When we get there, then we have this conversation. And it just sort of brings peace because you're okay with it.
Yeah.
So that's how I look at staff hires. Sometimes you already have the budget, but sometimes you're hiring for the future, but you have to have an acceptable loss. Don't just hire. People are like, I just hire, it's going to work out. I'm like, no. Figure out an acceptable loss by a certain amount of time. If that doesn't happen, then you got to make changes.
That's good. That's so good.
Yeah, but if you don't have an acceptable loss, you're just going to keep losing.
I love that.
And then once you hit that loss, then you're like, okay, we got to stop the bleeding.
Wow.
But an acceptable loss is okay, as long as it's going to continue to grow back up. I've been through this, I don't know how many times where I'm like, okay, I know we're going to lose $100,000, but I believe it's going to come back.
Can I ask one more piggyback question?
Yeah, of course.
And I know this is subjective. It's actually a rabbit trail our leadership team is going down right now.
Yep.
Is there when we talk about reserves or parachute funds or whatever you want to call it, basically that set aside fund just that would sustain the church through some type of economic crisis.
Yep.
What do you find, or is there a metric that you use that says, hey, this is a range that you should be looking at
for
that parachute account, like
okay.
like big savings account, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah. Okay. So here's what I like to do. Everybody's different.
Yes, sir.
What I like to do is there's a few thoughts on it. One is I like having on paper, and it might be like $1 million in this account, but on paper to the board, this is how much we have in cash reserves. For me personally, I don't like anything less than 6 months. So let's say it takes $30,000 a month to run your church, three times 6, 180,000. Okay, I don't want anything less than that. Let me go to number 2. I also like to build up a deferred maintenance fund. This is where you have someone on your team that if you have 2 campuses, I don't know if they both have buildings or not, but let's say they do. Okay. So you have someone on your team, an elder, a leader, I don't know, just somebody, a board member that once a year or twice a year goes and checks out everything at the church. They're in contracting and they're like, hey, Pastor Adam, we are probably around 2 years away from the air conditioner being a unit in that building. We're about 3 years away from the asphalt having to be redone at this building, and now all of a sudden you're building a deferred maintenance fund that's not touching your cash reserves. It's your deferred maintenance. And you're like, okay, we know in the next 3 to 4 years, it's never going to be perfect, but in the next 3 to 4 years, we're going to spend $100,000 or $80,000 on air conditioning units and parking lot, and we're going to have to redo something or whatever. I don't know, whatever it is. But you have that money in there. That's deferred maintenance. It's like you already know that's coming. You don't have to do a special campaign and, we're trying to redo the bathroom. Like you've already, because you can only play that trump card so many times.
Yeah.
People use the trump card on redoing bathrooms. I'm like, no, man, let's do something big. If we're going to do the trump card and try to raise money from the people, let's try to make sure we do something that's significant moving us forward. So cash reserves, awesome, 6 months. Deferred maintenance. Have a contractor in your church once every 6 months just goes and takes a couple hours at each building and gives their opinion of what's coming up and how much it probably will cost. Third sort of bucket, if you will, is called opportunity fund. Now, again, you might start off with hardly anything, but once you build up that 6 months, then you start working on deferred maintenance, then you start working on opportunity. And I'm not saying like, it's going to be there today. You might start off in 6 months only with $10,000 in there. Then it goes to 40. Then it goes to 100. Then it goes to 200. And it's sitting there waiting for the opportunity. Campus number 3 opens up some store or whatever it was that went down for the count. And they're just like, look, man, you find out through the real estate, they're willing to take 40 cents on the dollar. Now, what are you going to do? It costs $350,000. You're going to go and do a big campaign? Well, hold on, wait 9 months. It's going to take us 9 months to get the money. No, the opportunity arose and we took advantage because we had an opportunity fund. If you're a church that has vision and you want to grow and you want to develop, you got to have an opportunity fund because the opportunities will come knocking. Something's going to be there. It's like 40 cents on the dollar, 30 cents on the dollar, man. We're going in. This building's worth $700,000. We're getting it for $290, but we have to pay the money in the next 2 weeks. We bring the board together. There's no membership. There's no approval. It's just board. We going to do this or not? If we buy it for $290 and we're like, we shouldn't have bought it. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's sell it for $700. That's the worst case scenario. But you can't do that if you don't have an opportunity fund. Those are 3 different funds: opportunity fund, deferred maintenance fund, and cash reserves. Those are the funds that I like filling up. So always start with cash reserves first, though.
So good. Thank you.
Is that helpful?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You actually just lightened my load by 50%. Just brain power alone. These are 3 questions that I have just been racking my brain over. And I just want to thank you and Church Boom so much for all that you do to help pastors.
Oh man, no, absolutely. It's our privilege and honor, and take those things, man, apply those, know that we're here to help you. You're not in this thing alone. That's what Church Boom is all about. We coach pastors and rescue churches, and man, we just appreciate you. But thanks for being on today, man. Really cool to see you.
Thank you so much, Chris.
All right. Have a good day, bud.
Yes, sir.
Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Adam. I love talking about how to help the church win financially, which we all need to do that. I want to remind you, as I did at the beginning, to check out churchboom.org and check out our coaching certification program. If you've ever thought about being a coach, you want to develop a second income, a second chapter for your life, check out churchboom.org and our coaching certification program. We'll see you next time on The Fly on the Wall.